Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to record the oral history for Wadsworth for posterity. I'm Cesar Carino, your host, and our guest today is somebody almost everybody in town knows, and if there's someone who doesn't know her, probably because they moved in day before yesterday. Geraldine Harris. Jerry, you have been in town for what, how many years?
77.
When were you born?
October 29th, 1921.
To whom?
Gerald Melvin Barnett and Marie McIntosh Barnett.
Marie
Claire.
McIntosh Barnett. And you have a brother, too, a younger brother.
Yes, Alan Barnett.
Who is bald.
Yes.
And does not look like you, particularly.
No, he looked an awful lot like my father.
Looks like your father, right?
Very, very much like
so. And he is married to Bertie.
Bertie Louise Geyser.
Geyser, who was also from Wadsworth, and her parents lived on Grandview, did they not?
Right,
yeah,
and before that they were out on 548.
548.
She and Ann Gavineski were very good friends when they were growing up.
Down on 548, right. Let's hear a little bit more about your early days in Wadsworth and where you lived, where you were born, where it was that you were living when you were born, I should say. You were born at home, I suspect, weren't you? Because we didn't have a hospital when you were born.
Right, I was born at my grandmother's house on Tolbert Street.
On Tolbert. Who was your grandmother?
Blanche Akers Barnett.
Blanche Akers Barnett. Was she related to the Akers in town?
I don't believe so. It was A-C-R-E-S.
A-C-R-E-S.
No A-C-K-E-R.
Okay, the A-C-K, Leonard Aker was A-C-K-E-R.
Yeah, and Edgar Barnett. In fact, I was born on my grandfather's birthday.
Oh, really?
Yes, he was born October the 29th in 1978.
1878.
I believe that was it. And my grandmother was born in about 6 years later than that.
And you were born 1921. So you went to Wadsworth High School.
Oh, yes.
And you graduated 1939, somewhere around there.
Yeah,
we've had a lot of people.
That graduated was in the first graduating class from this school, our oldest boy, I believe, in 1961.
Of the new high school.
Right.
Right. Not the school where you and I went.
No.
Many years ago.
Right.
Tell us about your growing up years and who your neighbors were, with whom you played, and going to school and all of those kinds of things.
Well, I always told people that I carried my own suitcase when we moved over to 159 Fairlawn, but I was only 4 months old, so I had to
probably did not carry your own.
Prefabricated a bit. But anyhow, we lived there until I was married. In fact, I lived there for a while after I was married because my husband was in the service, and then when he came home, we had a house built on Crestwood. Before the street was paved, we were building a house there. And but I lived there until we were married in 1942.
People have a difficult time believing that Crestwood was not paved at one time.
Well, I had Cub Scouts, and I used to take my Cub Scouts from our house all the way through the back fields, and we would clear over onto what was then Gypsy Lane, now Hartman Road. And they had more darn fun going through the fields and stuff because old Mr. up on the corner that owned the property in back of us, cannot think of his name right now. Grace and Idell Storm's relative, and Faith Haynes and Johnny's.
Oh, yes, right.
Mr. Yes, you can't think of it.
Okay, it'll come to us, I'm sure. Lloyd Rouse.
We both got it.
Right.
Yes, and we had an enjoyable time there. Like you said, it was before the street was built, and people just can't believe that there were no houses.
It was all farmland. It was all farmland. Now, of course, it's all houses, but it's all farmland at that time. Who were some of your neighbors? Oh,
golly, we had some very nice neighbors. Homer Liebert had built his prefab in May, and we started building our house in July of 1947.
Tell us a little bit about Homer Liebert's mother and father and his family and sister and so forth.
Well, Homer lived there after he and Helen were married. And of course, Helen was a tennis star for Wadsworth. And
who was Helen?
Helen was Mrs. Miracle's sister. Lois Miracle's sister. Oh, I can't think of her maiden name.
We'll find out tonight.
Oh, sure I will. I'll think of it probably before I leave here.
Every single night I get a phone call from someone. You forgot that person's name, and her name was, or his name was. And that's fine, that's what we want.
Judy and John were their children, and they lived to the north of us. And Homer was an insurance agent, so naturally we had our insurance through that agency.
And who were his brothers and sister?
It was Homer's brother, it was Lois Miracle. Homer's sister, that was Lois Miracle, that's right. And Helen was Liebert before she was...
Helen Liebert.
Helen Liebert.
And then they had another brother, too.
Oh, yes, Mr. Miracle. No, that was her.
No, his brother. Homer's brother.
I don't think I knew him.
And then he had a sister, Jane.
I don't believe I knew her.
She was younger, probably. Homer Liebert Insurance, right? And he lived on Crestwood, and you lived on Crestwood at that time when you and your husband, and who was your husband? Or who is your husband, I should say?
Charles Harris.
Chuck Harris. And who was he, and what is his family relationship here in Wadsworth?
Well, they moved here when he was about 8 years old, I believe it was. His father is from Crete. His name was Evernidakis before we were married.
Crete, the island of Crete in Greece.
It was my fault we've changed our name because I thought, gee, writing Geraldine and then writing Evernidakis after that seemed like an awful lot of writing. And
So you changed
so
it
he
to
changed
Harris.
his name before he went to the service because his father had been called Harris for years. Maybe his wife didn't like the name, last name either,
Possibly
but
too.
We kidded our children, tell them we're going to change our names back. And they said, all that work you'd have to go through to change it?
Oh, I should say so.
So we haven't yet, but I just tease him a bit.
Now-
But Gary has had a license plate #1 Greek out in California for years.
Oh, really? We're going to hear about Gary in a little while because he's the mayor out there. Let's talk. We went from birth, 1921, all the way up to marriage, but we have some things that happened between there. So,
Oh, yes.
Tell us what happened between 1921 and birth, or rather,
Well,
marriage.
The people that lived on Fairlawn, of course, Merrimans were across the street, and Culps and Williams up the street, and
when
Christopher's.
you were living on Fairlawn when you were growing up?
Oh, yes, until 1942.
Until
Or 1945, really, when we moved into our new home.
Right, and who were the neighbors?
All right, there was Don Merriman across the street, Ray Culp next to him, and a Mr. Hartman in the little house, and were Reese Williams and his family, Justine Magel and Agnes and Reese, and across the street was the house on the corner where Hunters at one time, and then Christopher, he had a Standard Oil station downtown. And then a little house was built in between where Joan Haycoop lived for a while. And then
Joan Haycoop was Joan Fixler.
And right beside Mother and Daddy were Huffmans, Marge Huffman, Marge Neeser's
Marge
parents.
Neeser, now, well, she
And then
died.
down in the corner was Hackathorns, and then across the street was Houts. And
McEntee's.
well, yeah, McEntee's lived across the street by Merriman. I was going across Portage Street.
Oh,
down.
okay, I'll say.
Yeah, because down there were Semesters and Leonards and Sondels and Bachmans and all of those. And across the street were Hornoffs and Manns and Rocks and Pews and Doty's. And then Parker's lived there, and then McEntee's. And
Now, there's enough of a program right there, a whole hour just to talk about all those people. Let's talk a little bit about those people. Don Merriman, colorful person, very prominent in Wadsworth. He had a store, and he was heavily involved in politics, and he was also a mayor.
very outspoken.
And very outspoken. I guess that would be probably the thing that we could say about him, but dearly loved by everyone. One of the things that has grieved me a bit is that we can't get him on the program.
He doesn't hear well.
he doesn't hear
and he
well.
misses a lot.
And he doesn't want to come on the program, but my heavens, the memories he has.
Oh, yes.
But tell us a little bit about Don Merriman so that we have him recorded for historical evidence for the future. Tell us a little bit about Don Merriman.
Well, he had a gas station downtown for years. His wife worked over in Akron at Herbert Hall and Harder, and she worked there for years. And then she would help at the store also and did the books and so forth.
And her name was Opal what?
Zimmerman.
Zimmerman, right? And she's
And
not,
she has a nephew in Orville yet.
right, but she was not from Wadsworth, was she?
No, Orville,
No, Orville.
Doylestown area.
Oh, that area.
And they had no children. He had a sister Celia who died of TB at a young age. Very beautiful girl. I have a lovely picture of her.
Do you?
Very pretty girl.
Was she older or younger than
Younger.
Don? Younger than Don.
He went to college for 1 year, and he was called back out of college to attend the store and stuff because his father died suddenly. So he only had 1 year of college.
Who?
Don.
Don. Now, Don's father had a store too, is that it?
Well, I guess it was, yeah, I don't know if it was a gas station or not, but it was a store. Maybe it was a gas station. I've forgotten for sure. But we see him on a regular basis. He pops in on us. We might be out in the backyard, come in there, he is sitting in the couch, on the couch waiting for us.
We're coming in. Now, he, as we say that he's dearly loved, he was very, what did you say, outspoken?
Very outspoken.
Very outspoken, but you know where you stood.
Oh, yes.
You know where you stand. Now, tell us a little bit about some of the other people who were along that street.
Well, Ray Culp was a plumber. That was
Right.
next door to Merriman
And
on the west side.
he had a daughter who married a plumber too.
Lois Green married.
Lois Green, Les Green,
Lois married Les Green.
and Les
Virginia
Green.
married Lowell Stauffer.
Who?
Lowell Stauffer,
Who did?
Virginia.
Oh, Virginia married Lowell Stauffer, yes.
And then there was Edwin, who had married Ray Jean Higgins.
And she wasn't from, yeah, she was from Wadsworth, yes, that's right, the Higgins
They
from
moved to
Wadsworth.
California years ago, and then she died, and well, Ed died first, and then she died.
And go down the street again, and you went so fast, and we would like to hear about these families, because you know every single one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us a little
Well,
bit about them.
we used to say that when the town was about 4,000 and 5,000 people, there were very, very few people that my father or I didn't know. We used to know about
Oh,
everybody.
yes, I can still remember going through the telephone directory in the early 40s, that would be 1940, 41, something like that, and knowing every family.
And then News Banner's phone number was number 7.
7, and Alan Hartzell's number 8.
I forget who 9 was.
Overhaul and Freeborn was 4-1 and 4-2. Carburetor ignition was 8-6.
Oh, I didn't call those much.
We do remember those kinds of things.
Well,
Now,
before McEntees lived there, Millers lived there, Ben and Mary Miller, and he worked for the B&W, and he went out and oversaw the building of Boulder Dam. And for a while they were gone, I believe it was 1 year, my folks moved over into their house and rented our house out so that we could look after Miller's cats and so forth.
right. Now tell us about Ben Miller and his going out to oversee the Boulder Dam. Very few people in Wadsworth know that Ben Miller oversaw Boulder Dam.
Well, I'm not sure just what all overseeing he
Well,
did.
he didn't
but
build the whole thing, but he had a huge impact on it because he was working for B&W, and
Right.
B&W was involved so heavily with it. Now, Ben Miller had, let's get the relationship straight. This is not the same Miller family that lived on Upper Highland Avenue, is it?
No.
They didn't have any family here when I established that. Then when Miller's moved out and McEntees moved in, what, about 1933, 34,
Something like that,
early 30s.
Yeah, because I was babysitting Lillian's children when her husband Steve died. He worked at the B&W also. And I enjoyed pulling the kids around the wagon and playing with them. And
There are
so
4 children, a pair of twins, and then 2 girls.
Mary Lou and Betty,
Betty.
who was
Betty
McEntee
Gehring.
Drive is named after Betty
That's right.
McEntee as a Wadsworth Queen. And then there was Dick and Jerry, the twins.
The twins, and they probably are close to 65 now, aren't they? Very close to, if they aren't 65, yeah.
I haven't paid any attention to their
Lillian
sent
is still
cards, but I
living.
don't- Yes.
She's still
Jerry lives on Loma Linda Circle in Uniontown, and Dick is at home.
he stays
And Betty lives up on Woodland,
Woodland Avenue,
and Mary Lou lives up in Sheffield Lake.
Sheffield Lake, right?
And Mary Lou has 7 or 8 children. I
She had
forget.
9.
9. Whoops, I lost one.
Well, she had more than that, but some were born still, she had miscarriages, whatever.
Oh, my mother would take care of the McEntee children during the day while Lillian worked, because
Lillian worked at the B&W.
after Steve died,
After
she got a
Steve died.
job. B&W gave her.
Steve died of what, do you remember?
I'm not sure if it's TB or not. I'm not really sure.
Just was very sad. I remember that, it's very sad.
He was a
And-
very pleasant, very quiet
Oh.
man, but very nice.
Well,
Well,
one of-
Lillian is too.
One of my favorites is Lydia McEntee, absolutely,
Yeah.
there's no question about
I
that.
wish she could be on, but she's not well enough right now.
If she were better, I would like to have her on the program too, because she could tell us a great deal about the B&W, people moving in from,
Right.
she was from Bayonne, New Jersey. And many of the people came from
And
Bayonne.
Roselle Park also, yeah.
Yes, Roselle Park, right, that's right. Tell us, keep on going down the street and tell us about these people, Jerry.
Well, Parkers lived next door. They
Which
were,
Parker was that?
Jane and her daughters Mickey and Carol. And I can't remember Mr. Parker, whether they lived there. She must have been a Doty before she was married, Mrs. Parker, because the Doty name is real strong in there, and I can't quite place it, but I don't remember Mr. Parker. Excuse me. And they moved to Florida, Mrs. Parker did, and my mother and she corresponded. My mother was a great letter writer, and she corresponded with Jane quite some time, and when we went down to Florida one time, I think we've been there 3 times or less, and we stopped to visit Jane one time and went to her church. Oh, she had a beautiful big church. It's one of those that are like some of these around here now, 1,000 members and so on.
Oh, really?
And I forget when they moved, and the Smedes live there now. and I do not know the Smees well at all.
They moved in
They had a
recently.
sports store, I knew that.
Sports stores.
Here in town they had for a
Okay,
while.
that, the same Smees then had the sports store in Wadsworth.
And
Then,
Adrian Freed was next with his old cars.
okay, now tell us about Adrian Freed. Now, he's just one of those,
He was very happy man, very,
Oh,
very
boy.
pleasant. He would do anything for you. And Catherine was very quiet and all and very unassuming, but she was,
now when you talk about the old cars, tell us about the 2 old cars that he had.
oh, I got to drive Merriman's Model A Ford too and ride in the rumble seat on that one. And Adrian had cars like that too. He had 3 or 4 in the garage back there, and he would get them out and go up the street, chug, chug, up the street, and we all enjoyed seeing his cars. And, oh, he had them shine to a
Oh, yeah, the beautiful cars. I'd love-
They certainly were.
I had a Model A Ford with a rumble seat one time, and I sold it for $45 because I couldn't get $50 for it.
Oh, my.
If I had that now, it'd be worth about $10,000 or so.
Oh, easily.
Yeah, that was, of course, many, many years ago. And then down from Adrian, who was next.
Pews, Hannah Pugh and her mother.
Now, they didn't stay in Wadsworth forever, did they?
Pews?
Yeah.
Well, her mother died here, and I think Hannah died here, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I believe so. And I do not know the family that lives there now. There's a minister, I believe, that lives in that house or in Freed's house now that Merriman speaks of now and then.
And then down the street from
All right,
there,
from there was Alice Rock's parents, Harry and
Harry Ross.
Mrs. Rock. I don't
Mrs.
you
Rock.
called Harry, but Mrs. Rock, you called Mrs. Rock.
Right.
And there was Alice, and she married a Lester Brown.
Lester Brown,
And they're
right.
both gone now.
Yeah, the whole family's
And she
gone.
only had one daughter, I believe. And then after them was June Mann. She's living over in Barberton now. Her son has an apartment house by the Indian statue. And June is living there now. She married Bill Beam. And her sister Beatrice was married to Robert Gorman, who was in our class. And they're both gone.
Robert Foreman?
Gorman.
Robert Gorman, right. I was going to say Robert Foreman now.
And I don't know much about the Manns. They weren't as open and friendly a family as say, the Freeds and some of the others. I don't know, maybe they were older or something, I don't know, but they just didn't seem quite as friendly. And though Ada Hornoff was friendly, but you couldn't say that Elmer was very friendly. He was all for business.
Oh, but he's great, though.
Oh, yeah.
I really, really admired Elmer Hornoff because
he's really
he's another person who you knew where you stood.
Oh,
But he was
yes.
as good, as gentle as he could be with that gruffness, but he was a very, very fine person.
And very, very nice.
Oh, great people, the
But
Hornoffs.
like you said, you didn't get away with anything when you were kids and
Oh,
playing around.
no, sir, no, sir. He's all business. And then
My brother played with Eddie Hornoff quite a bit.
a lot of
They got into trouble now and then.
Who was across the road then from
All right,
Hornoffs?
across from them, Leonard's, Jean Leonard and Gordon
Bob.
Leonard and
Bob Leonard?
Bob Robert. And she then, after Dutch died, she married Denton Mosier,
Denton Mosier.
who had 2 children, Bob
M.O.S..
and Maxine.
Right, right.
Maxine's out west in Arizona or New Mexico,
One
somewhere
of the
out
western
there.
states, right.
Yeah. And of course, Bob's retired from Firestone. All right, then next to them was,
North, we're going north now.
yeah, we're going north. See Leonard's, and then I said, well, that was Leonard's and Mosier's. All right, that would be, oh boy. Now the third one up was Sondels.
Which Sandals, though?
Bob Senior, who
Bob
had the
Senior.
Bob's
Bob's
Cafe.
Cafe,
And then, of course, it was Bob and Francis and Jim, and,
No.
Bob and Francis.
Francis,
and, Dolly.
no, Dolly's a
Martha-
baby.
Martha.
Francis, Martha,
and Dolly.
Jim, and then Dolly.
Okay.
Right. Her real name is Isabel.
forgotten it.
Isabel, right. And Mary Sondels, Bob Senior's wife, is still living. She's 100, 3 or 4, somewhere.
Something like that, and doing fine yet, I guess. Somebody
And
mentioned her just the other day.
And she lost her oldest son, Bob Sondels, a few years ago.
He was in our class in school,
Right.
too.
We're trying to get Jim Sondels to come onto the program because the Sondels have a tremendous history here in Wadsworth. And I tried to get a couple of the other Sondels, and they have declined respectfully, but I think maybe Jim will do it. And if Jim will come down, that'll be just tremendous because we need to get that portion of the history.
He was younger, and I don't remember him much at all.
Jim, Jim is 70 now.
Is he?
Well, very close to it.
It doesn't, I guess I don't feel 77.
And Dolly is, I won't say how old Dolly is, but she's a year younger than I am, and I'm 2 years younger, or 2 years younger than Jim. So whatever that is.
Right.
Now, going north then,
All right. Now, Leo
Sandals.
Raker lives there now, and there was a family that lived there. House was on the corner, and then that next family, I did not know them well, and I cannot think if there were children there when we were growing up or not. Haritas lived there for a while. You know, they were one of the last few to live there. So I don't know who lives there now, but I don't remember who lived there when we were growing up, but it wasn't somebody we played with, apparently, because I don't even remember children there.
you went to school in Wadsworth, and you
Lincoln.
probably went to Lincoln. And you probably remember every person in the classroom and names
Oh, I
and
was going to
addresses.
bring a picture of our class.
Bring a picture. Well, we can do that. Who
And
were
I had
some
a
of the
great
people?
big picture of the entire staff of the Ohio Injector at one time.
Oh, you have that
When my
picture?
dad was there. It was all curled up, and I was going to bring that, and I thought, well, you probably don't want it.
Oh, we surely do. We'd love to see those pictures, as a matter of fact. Who were the people involved with the elementary school, and then we'll go quickly through your school life, and then into your marriage, and then your political life, and your civic life, and all of those other kinds of things.
Well, let's see. I remember I liked Miss Mills. Not very many people liked the principal of
Lottie
school, Miss
Mills.
Mills.
She was a toughie.
I don't know whose watch it was, but I had to take a watch in, and I got to pick it up. It was probably my father's, because I can't imagine Mother having a watch at that time. But she had a watch, but maybe not when I was younger. But Mr. Nolf had a watch repair shop in the large white house across the street from the Methodist Church.
Right, Ollie Nolf.
And so I got to go up in the clock shop and pick up the watch and watch him a while and talk. And both he and his wife were lovely people. They're just so nice, just like Isa Giles, who used to live next door to the Catholic Church. She was such a nice lady. And
Who was that again?
Isa
Giles. Who was Isa Giles, and
I
what
don't know.
relationship?
But I found out later that she had been in Eastern Stars, and I'm in Eastern Stars now, and I sure wish I would have known then that I was going to be in Stars. But
Right.
Anyhow, I got to know Miss Mills always came to the door when I'd go to the door, and I got to know her, and so I never called her Lottie, of course.
Oh, no, you
But
bet.
heaven forbid. But when I went to school, I was very careful what I did, because she was quite stern.
Oh, she was, but everyone loved her. Yeah,
Yep.
they do now. They probably didn't at that time. but
Yeah,
they
at
loved
that
her.
time, because she...
And what else do you remember about Lincoln School at the time?
Well,
It was
Chester
a-
Hawk was our 6th grade teacher, and I think Mrs. Schneider was our 5th. I cannot remember the 4th. And I think Mrs. Wright was our 1st grade, and I didn't even bother to think about 2nd and 3rd, but I know we liked all of our teachers. I didn't like some of the teachers that taught my children up there, but I liked my teachers.
We are going to mention those now.
But
Then we
anyhow,
go to the junior high school at that time, which was
Yeah,
the,
well, they were ready to, I was ready to go to Central School at the 4th grade when they built on 5th and 6th. So I was able to go to all 6th grades up there at Lincoln. And still a lot of us classmates keep in touch with each other.
Who are some of the classmates you still keep in touch
Oh,
with?
you had Bob Tubising on, and of
Yes.
course he comes to our breakfast rarely, but we see Gene Holcomb and Dale Holcomb all the time. Mickey
And
Wagner.
Gene
Stauffer.
Stauffer.
Lowell Stauffer,
Well,
who
Lowell,
married
that's
Virginia
right.
Stauffer. Virginia Culp. And there's Dale and Jean and Maxine Wagner, and
I want to get her on the program too,
oh yeah.
but I can't reach her. I've been trying to get, she's Maxine Granger. Been trying to reach her for months, and I can't
Well,
reach her.
she's out at the trailer park.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe if you see her, we'd like to have her on
Well,
the program
next week is the breakfast. Why don't
Okay,
you
tell
pop
her.
in on our breakfast?
Because, her father had the threshing business, and
Tractor, Avery Wagner.
Avery Wagner, and he had an Avery tractor as well. But he worked
Yeah,
with
and there was Nellie Brown and George Hallowell and Mary Jane Strauns and
Mary Jane Strauss married George Hallowell.
and Dick Bird and Mary.
But George is gone now. And Dick Bird and Mary. Who is Mary?
I don't know if she was from town.
I don't think she was.
I don't think so.
Dick
And,
Bird was. He was from out what we used to call Stony Ridge.
Right. All right, George Harder and Thelma Weckbacher and Star Joachim, and his wife was not from around here either.
No.
And Howard Lorton still comes, and he has a second wife. His first wife was a Snyder girl. And Bob Brown came to our last breakfast, but he's not in town very often.
Bob Brown, the pharmacist.
And let's see, we lost 6 our first year of our class reunion. First time we had a class reunion, we had lost 6 through the war and
To the
stuff.
war. Who were they?
Oh, Jack Mason, Don Simister, and Wayne Crawford, and Hal Taylor. Dick Bernard wasn't in our class, but he was the 1 year ahead of us. I don't know who the other one was. But anyhow, but at the breakfast, we have an average of, I'd say, 17, and sometimes we have more, sometimes up to 23,
Really?
25 or so.
As we get older, we like to have those kinds of reunions on a more regular basis because we don't know
Well,
how
I
many
don't
we're-
always get there, and I get chewed out a lot. And I just talked to Dale Hookham on the phone the other day about some business, and he said, when our breakfast is next week, I said, I know, but I said, I've got to do this and this and this. I have to make cookies for installation that night and so on. So well, I'll see Jean at church. He said, remember the breakfast.
breakfast. You have a lot of good memories there. And remember hers as well. Now, you went through high school. Who were some of your favorite high school people, and who were some of the friends that you associated with in high school?
Well, I'm afraid that I just mostly associated with my husband to be.
And he was,
Charles Avrandikis. And
but
Charles
that wasn't
Harris.
his name, his Charles Harris at the
Harris,
time, right? Now, when did you meet him, and how did you meet him?
I had a friend, Mary Louise Hanshy, who was from the south end of town. Her father had that beer establishment on the corner that Eckhoff had for a while.
Yes,
And
it was his,
Mary Louise and I palled around a little bit in school, and he liked her, and he had me deliver notes to her.
and so you became the messenger, and he fell in love with the messenger. That's, that sounds like something you could write a story about. The Hanshies. I've been trying to get one of the Hanshy grandchildren on.
Now, which Hanshy are you speaking of?
Well, the Hanshies, they're all related, aren't they?
Well, there's Leland Hanshy that was out here on Broad Street.
Aren't they related, all the Hanshies?
I'm not sure they're related. I'm
I
not
thought they
sure.
were all related.
I didn't think so, but
But I've been trying to get,
the daughter that worked at the city building?
yes, I'm trying to get her, and she won't come on because the Hanshies have a phenomenal history here in this town.
Yeah, well, Leland Hanshy was
goes
in our class
way,
at school. He
way,
married
way
Esther
back.
Liston.
Esther Liston, right? Floyd Liston's sister. Tell us about some. How did you meet your husband then? You were carrying notes back and forth.
Yeah,
and
because
then,
it was in like the 7th grade and 8th grade. And of course, when we were friends all through school with, Justine Williams and Pauline Shank and Charlotte Overholt and Evelyn Overholt, and all those people were friends and stuff. And I would play with Justine and Lois. And of course, we were in school plays and on debate teams and stuff like that together and things. And
basketball.
oh yes, and soccer. When I came home and told my father that I didn't make I guess it was soccer team, he said, why not? I said, didn't make it. And he said, well, he wanted me to play all the sports, so I was in all 4 sports. I
Whether you
wasn't
made it-
terrific at any of them, maybe, but I enjoyed basketball and baseball and soccer and
That's what he
volleyball.
wanted you to do, and you did.
I
it.
enjoy sports, and I still do. I
You still enjoy
sports.
sports. Of course, that's why you're in such good
Now,
shape.
my husband did not, but I've kind of won him over.
When were you married? Excuse me.
Where?
When?
Oh, on June the 6th, 1942.
Oh, you waited until after you graduated from high school for 3 years. Then, what did you do from 1939 to 1942?
Well, my first job I got was when I was 10 years old,
Doing what?
sitting with a month-old baby. If you don't think I wasn't proud to be trusted with a month-old
I
baby.
can imagine. Who was the month-old baby?
Dorothy Kilmer.
Dorothy Kilmer. But that's her married name.
Her maiden name was Kilmer. She's Corbello now and lives out in Long Beach.
What's Dorothy Kilmer? That's the one who was...
Manford and Mary is.
Oh, Mansford Kilmer. Okay, all right. That Dorothy Kilmer.
And when I was, let's see, that was when I was 10. Then when I was, I'm going to say about maybe 12 or 13 or so, I waited on tables at the hotel when they were serving those Sunday dinners. People came from miles around
At the
Cleveland
Park-
and everything at the Park Hotel.
Tell us as much about the Park Hotel as you can remember.
Well, of course, I remember old Doc Kreider at the back there, and Doris Fixler helping with the hotel and all. And it was a very, very nice place, fixed up very posh at that time. But no, we would think it was just an old-fashioned front room or something or other. But I don't remember how many tables they had, but there were about 3 or 4 of us girls that waited on tables, and we usually got 50 cents for a tip. But every once in a while, you'd get more than that.
Wow.
But all of that was great.
Now, who else worked with you?
I do not remember any of the gals that did it. I really don't. And I've tried to think of some
Who
of them.
did the cooking?
I don't know if Doris helped or not.
And what kind of
Maybe
meals did
Mrs.
they have?
Casey and Mrs. Casey may have done some. I don't know.
Mrs. Casey
Maybe. I don't know.
from Broad Street. And what
Chicken was the big thing.
Chicken was the big thing. And describe a meal that they would have.
Well, they would have chicken and the vegetable and mashed potato and heaping servings of everything. And how we could carry 3 and 4 plates at a time, I don't remember how at that age, because now, of course, when you're on the slippery floors, like at Lions Club or something like that, you're worrying about handling 2 or 3 plates. But at that time, we tried to carry 3, 4, maybe more. And we didn't have the great big trays they have now. And but everything was served very hot, and they would have desserts. Sometimes it was apple dumplings, and sometimes it was pie. But people just raved about the meals. They were just...
And do you remember how much they cost?
I think it was $1.50, but I'm not sure.
And that was probably quite a bit in those days, too, right? But you say they came from all over. Where'd they come from?
Cleveland, Akron, Barberton, Seville.
And this would have been in the 30s,
Medina.
right? What years do you think that might have been?
Well, let's see. If I was 10 in 1931, I would imagine it'd be about 33 and 34.
And you worked there? And were there any adults working there at the time?
Not serving.
Not serving, just the girls. Young girls serving. And describe the living room that you're talking about in the old hotel. And
Well, they had steps at 2 different places, if I remember rightly, 2 wide step areas to go into it. And it wasn't a square room as I remember. It was...
No, it wasn't. As a matter of fact, it was...
octagonal something.
Well,
It was...
It had... well, I guess steps, that's the wrong word, I'm sure, but it wasn't squared off.
No,
right now.
And
it
the
wasn't
kitchen
too
was
big
at the back,
either.
and we came in and served them, but got back out as quickly as we could. No swinging doors or anything.
Nothing. It wasn't very big. No. That was, I need to, so that everyone knows where the Park Hotel was, approximately, 500 feet north of the intersection of College Street and High Street.
I would
On
say it
the
would probably
west side of the road.
be about where the alley is between
Yes.
the electric store and the
Bixler's and
the dime or Ritzmann's.
Ritzmann's pharmacy. But you see, that may not be here 50 years from now.
Right,
That's
and
why-
then there was that driveway area was back to Doc Kreider's veterinary shop.
All right, Dr. Kreider was a part owner, but he owned the
owned the
hotel. And
His wife was too old to serve or anything. She may have been doing some of the cooking. Wasn't she a sister of Elizabeth Casey?
no, that was Mrs. Bender.
Okay.
Mrs. Elizabeth Casey
that's
was
right.
related to
Katie Bender.
Catherine Bender, and Joe Bender had the restaurant around the corner. The Fixlers were involved with the hotel, the Fixlers.
They
Joanne
also had the dime store down the street,
Who, the Fixlers? Where?
about where Mr. Shantz's office used to be.
Oh, really? Oh, no, that's something I had not remembered for the dime store. The Fixlers had a dime store there. Well, you have a good memory.
Well, I had dimes more than I had dollars.
Yeah, that's right. And everyone else did too. As a matter of fact, the 5 and 10s were very popular for materials and pins.
My father didn't, he drove, but he had no car, not until 1949.
Is that right?
I'd been driving, I'd been married 7 years by then. My husband taught me to drive when I was about 16 or 14.
And you learned how to drive at that time. No, there was no driver education in school.
No driver's license.
Nothing. Oh, that's right. 1937, driver's license came into
Well,
being.
I was driving in 36.
36, so you
35.
didn't have a driver's license. What else did you do after you graduated from school before you got married?
Oh, let's see. Right after I got, I started working at the picture show when I was 14. And
Who
you got
was the?
paid.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Earl Stites owned it, and John Mueller was a relative of his, and he worked at Eddie Mills was there, and Jim Witchy was one of the ushers.
Eddie Mills. Who's Eddie Mills?
I do not know what his wife's or his mother's name was.
What did he
or
do
anything,
there?
But he was the manager of the theater.
Was he also the projectionist?
No, Bill Yaki was the projection.
Yaki was the projector, and then John Wooler was also.
He took over after, he came in when Mr. Seitz couldn't. Mr. Seitz lived in Sandusky.
Right.
And he had theater up there. And I don't know where John came from, if he was from the Sandusky area or not, but wasn't he a nephew or something of Earl Seitz's?
But John Wooler lived in Wadsworth.
Yeah, so
Yes.
he moved to Wadsworth, yes.
Right. I didn't know that he was a nephew of Seitz's.
Well,
but
he
that's
was some relation of theirs. I don't recall.
something.
When you're 14, you don't always remember everything. But I know that I was paid 25 cents an hour, and I got 2 free passes a week, so naturally I gave them to my husband to be.
Of course.
Naturally. And then I worked at the Star Theater also. And see, that was when I was 14 or 15. Of course, I was in the school band and in the school orchestra and
What did you
church
play?
orchestra. A violin, poorly, and nothing like your brother Caesar or your
Chris.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, but I got by, and let's see, when I had also worked after I was married, though I worked a little bit for Attorney Garvin, for Attorney Wilson, and when I first came back from, well, let's see, I got married. We were going to get married the end of June of 1942, and he was drafted and went to the service, and he was down in Biloxi after his training periods and so forth. And we went down there. I went down there with his mom and dad and sister. His parents were divorced, but his mother had come from Jersey to visit. And so we all went down to see Chuck over Memorial Day. And we spent about 4 days together, and I decided I didn't want to come back to Wadsworth, and so we decided to get married down there. So
You got married down there?
And Mr. Harrison and Mrs. Harrison were our witnesses, and we got married at a church down there. And so then when I came back from Biloxi in September, I was pregnant, and I worked for Rood and Brando and Rood Insurance Agency.
And where were they?
They were located about where John Hanna is.
Brandon and Rood.
Brando, Glenn Brando.
Tell us about where they were from. They weren't from Wadsworth, though.
Oh, Mr. Rood was.
Mr. Brando wasn't.
No,
though.
I
He
don't
was
know.
from.
Glenn from Barberton, I think, wasn't he? Or
Well, I'm not positive.
I'm not either. It's been quite a while, but I worked there the whole time I was pregnant until about 5 days before the baby was born. And then I didn't go back afterwards because I had a baby to take care of. And let's see, that was 42. Chuck got discharged in 45, and I wasn't working, and he was not happy here. He loved Arizona. He'd been at Davis Monthan Field out there, and he really loved Arizona and wanted to live there. So we had a 10-year-old car, 47 Plymouth, and we drove out to California, and I had Larry by then. Larry was 5 months old, I think, something like that.
Yeah, 10-year-old car in 1945. It was a 37
And a
Plymouth.
4-year-old car, all right, 37.
37 Plymouth, yeah.
4-year-old, and then this 7 or 8 month old, I guess he was then. And we drove out to the west, and I forgot about a year before that, his father wanted him to be in the liquor business. And he said that was where the money was at this time, all the guys coming home from the service and everything. So he purchased, or helped us purchase, Vaughn nightclub at 1307 Grand Street in Akron. And we ran that for a year, but we don't drink, we don't smoke, and I wasn't happy, and
You gave it up.
yeah, I bowled, and I had to come to Wadsworth weekly to bowl, and I would take Wadsworth water over there to drink because the water was so horrid. And but anyhow, then we lived upstairs over the nightclub, but you had to watch it all the time, because if you would tell them to leave so many boxes of cigars or cigarettes or so many cases of beer, if you didn't check it, you didn't always get what you
You didn't get what you
ordered.
wanted, that's right.
And so we ran that for 1 year, and it was, if it had been ice cream or candy, I might have still been there. A little larger probably, but anyhow, then we came back here to Wadsworth, and then we started to build the house, and he stayed with his dad, and the children, and I stayed with my mom and dad until we got the house built.
Where did Chuck work all this time?
He went to work at the B&W on 11/11 in 1947.
November 11th, 1947.
He was there for 33 years.
Now, who was this baby who was born in 1943?
That was Gary.
Gary. What's Gary doing now?
Well, right now he is working for Adobe Software out in Belmont, California, but he had been on in city politics for some time. He was city commissioner for several years, and then he was mayor of Belmont. And I forget how many people, I think it's over 20,000 people in Belmont, if I'm not mistaken, but it was quite a busy job, because there were so many meetings that, well, like John Hanna knows, there's so many meetings you must attend also. And
But he was the mayor out there.
well, he was. He did not get reelected this last time, and he's just recently become engaged to an attorney.
Oh, really?
He's been divorced for 17 years, and he has 3 children, and they live out there. And then Larry was the middle boy. He was born in 46. So one was 43, one was 46, and then David was born in 49.
And then Larry's wife.
Jane Flood.
Died.
Yeah, she died 12 years ago. Be 13 years next June.
And that was Kenny and Ruth Flood's
One of the
daughter.
twins,
One of the twins, right.
And, well, let's see.
And who was the other twin?
Jean Weideman. And, of course, Carol Logodice is a sister, and Tim
Yes.
Flood is a brother. And Becky, sure, Pataki. And Jean and Becky both work at the PNW. Tim is in construction business, I believe, down in Georgia. And Carol and Jerry, everybody knows Carol and Jerry.
Oh, boy, you bet.
And, well, let's see, I took the census in 1950. I helped take it. I didn't do it by myself, trust me. I just had an area. But, I mean, I helped with the census. And there I met John Mooney down at the EJ Company. And
Tell us where the EJ Company was and tell us what they made.
416 South Main Street, and they made redwood storm windows for Sears Roebuck.
That's right.
And screens. And he must have been impressed with me or something or other, because he called and asked if I would come to work for him.
John Mooney, and John Mooney was on the program. He has since left business, has gone completely into peace endeavors.
That's Looney.
Oh, what are you talking about?
Mooney.
No, I'm sorry, John Mooney, you're right.
Right.
Okay, I'm sorry, okay.
Yeah, I did have a stint where I worked for John Mooney for a short time while,
John Looney or John Mooney?
John Looney for a short time.
Okay, John
while,
Looney, let's make that straight. John Looney is the one who was with
manufacturer's
Doors.
representative or something.
He was with Doors Incorporated for a while, wasn't he? John Looney.
I don't think so.
I thought he was, but anyway, he was in business, but he divested himself from all of that, and he works for the peace effort. Excuse me, peace effort now. You're talking about John Mooney.
Right.
Now tell us about John M-O-O-N-E-Y. Tell us about him.
M-O-O-N-E-Y, Mooney.
Right.
He was the general manager for this
EJ Company.
EJ Company, which was owned by Elmer and Jim, I think it was, yeah, sure, I can't say it now. Oh, you threw me off with getting with Looney. Anyhow.
When it comes to you, you just say it.
But I suppose. But anyhow, he wanted me to come to work for him, so I went there, and I started out by just filing. That's all he had hired me to do, and they had stacks of tissues to be filed that nobody ever filed the second and third sheets. And so I sorted and filed for several months, and then I would run out of stuff to do. I was just supposed to be part-time, and they wanted to know if I could do anything else. And I said, well, like what? And so they said, well, Mac was the plant supervisor, and Charlie Braunstrup worked there.
Charlie Braunstrup, approximately 65 years of age now, lived on where? Where did Charlie live?
I do not recall. I don't think
young
he's still
Charlie
alive.
or old Charlie?
Old Charlie.
Okay. Charlie Braunstrup's son, Charlie.
I didn't know he was around here.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't, but he's a school principal. He went to Wadsworth schools and so forth. He's a school principal elsewhere, somewhere in eastern Ohio. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, he and his, Eleanor was the office manager. Eleanor Braunstrup was working in the office. And anyhow, McDonald was from Cleveland, and when they asked if I could maybe take shorthand or something, I said, well, I could after a fashion. Miss Teeple never got me to really get into shorthand like she would have liked me to. I like to write it out shorthand, longhand. And but anyhow, I did their letters for a while, and then there was another man from Cleveland. And so I would do their letters and stuff, and then I would still run out of stuff to do, and they kept trying to keep me there all day. Well, my mother was taking care of the children while I was there. And, but anyhow, it ended up that Mr. Mooney and Mrs. Braunstrup did not get along well, and he wanted her out of there. And so he had her teach me how to do the bonus, which she did not want to teach me, because she was the only one that could figure how many screens they worked on, how many windows. The bonus was figured on how many of each piece of whatever they accomplished. And but she finally taught me, and so when I learned it, and I'd done it for 2 months, they let her go, and oh, she was furious, which I don't blame her. And I felt terrible, but I had not gone there to get a job thinking I was going to replace anybody. Well, then it got to that I was working longer and longer hours, and my husband wanted me at home, so I had to quit. And then later on, Monty Skank asked me to come and work for him when it was Wadsworth Millwork. And I went to work for him. And one day,
And Monty Skank, let's spell S-K-S-H-E-N-K. Right.
his son is now running Doors Incorporated.
Doors Incorporated, right.
Well, when Monty started, he was down there on Walnut Street, West Walnut Street. And so I went to work for him in the office, and I was just kind of general front person you run into it. Well, when I was at the EJ, I did a lot of the hiring, sort of. For some reason, the DPs and I got along very well. I did not speak one iota of any foreign language at all, but they could relate to me and I could relate to them. If they were hurt in the shop, they came to me. If they wanted adjustments, they would come to me. Well, and over there, so I was in the same capacity there. I would go through the resumes and so on. And one time this young man came in and he was such a nice looking young man that I really thought he should be hired. And I told Monty, gave him the application, showed him. He was not interested in him. And I said, but he has such a knowledge of tools. Well, how do you know? And I said, well, my father had a lot of tools and I learned from there. And I've been my husband's gopher for a few things now and then. And I knew a lot about tools too. And I said, he could do this, he could do that, and so on. No. And then he came back a second time, and he finally hired him, and that was Bill Stewart, who is now Stewart Cabinet Sales and so on. So then later,
he actually owns the place.
Right. Then later, Bill reciprocated, and he hired me as his first employee.
Is that right? So Bill Stewart, who had what do they call it?
Stewart Cabinet Sales and Wadsworth Sash and Door.
Wadsworth Sash and Door, which burned on Halloween of 1997. Burned down the same time that Holmesbrook burned down. It was an arson thing. But Bill Stewart went to the Wadsworth Millwork, and you thought that he would be a good person because he was good looking.
No, because he had such a knowledge of tools. But he was such a clean cut. A lot of people would come in grubby clothes and apply as though they just got off of a railroad car or something. And he came in dressed very neatly, and that impressed me because they didn't always dress that neatly when they came to apply for a job. I was used to a lot of the DPs and stuff at the other place too that didn't have clothes.
We're going to have to identify what DPs are. We know what they are, but they're called displaced persons.
Right.
And these were the people who were sent out, particularly from Hungary, during the revolution there in the 40s and 50s of
very broken English. They couldn't write. A lot of them said, if I had time, I would sit there and help them fill it out. But for some, I don't know why.
Then that's a real story. Bill Stewart wasn't going to be hired. No, Monty Skank. I'm sorry. Okay, we got the right people here. Monty Skank, and then you forced the issue, or at least
please talk to him.
Please talk to him. Okay, that's forcing the issue when a woman says, "Please talk to him," and they hired him. Then he now owns the Wadsworth Sash and Door.
And Stewart Cabinet Sales. It's a
Stewart
combined.
Cabinet Sales, and you were involved with that.
When I look back at some of the things I typed.
Jobs.
I stayed there with Stewart's until back in 1955.
Office wall. Now spell that because
DELP. business. Well, this man and Leo needed help with income tax forms, and so I'm business also, and but anyhow, o'clock I